Welcome back to DeChamps Rants and Reviews. I'm Mark DeChamp Deschamps, and today I want to talk about an interesting debate that I've seen online a lot lately. Well, over the last few years, if I'm being honest with you, and that is the Virtual Console versus Nintendo Switch Online. Now, if you're unfamiliar with the Virtual Console, the concept was back when the Wii launched, Nintendo allowed users, to download old games released on classic hardware. So, for the first time in years, users were able to download classic games like Super Mario World, Donkey Kong Country, A Link to the Past. And one of the best things is that the games were fairly cheap. So instead of, having to buy, a $30 Game Boy Advance re-release of, Super Mario Brothers 3 or Yoshi's Island, you were able to spend, $5 for the NES version of Super Mario Brothers 3 or $8 for the Super Nintendo version of Yoshi's Island. It was a really cool concept, and it was kind of ahead of its time, really. At that point, it was kind of unthinkable, and it was a selling point for the Wii hardware for a lot of people. Unfortunately, over time, the service kind of fell apart, and eventually Nintendo stopped supporting it. So it was a thing in the Wii era. It stuck around for the Wii U, and then we also had virtual console games on the Nintendo 3DS. However, Nintendo decided to make a big change when they jumped over to the Switch. Instead of allowing players to download, these classic games, you were able to revisit them by subscribing to Nintendo Switch Online. So a big changeover was that now we have dedicated apps that have, tons of old games that you can play as part of your subscription. So instead of paying, between $5 and $10, or sometimes it would be like $11, $12 for like an older, like import N64 game, you basically now get to play these as part of your subscription, which, if you have like the base model of Nintendo Switch Online, is $20 a year. And if you have, the expansion pass tier, you end up paying $50 a year. And that's if you don't have like the whole family plan and, all that stuff. They both have their positives and negatives, and it's really interesting because there's a lot of fans that have they have rose-colored glasses when it comes to Virtual Console. Now, personally, I was a huge fan of the Virtual Console when it came out. We came out, when I was in college, and there was something really cool about, reminiscing with friends, sometimes over alcoholic beverages, about, Sonic the Hedgehog 2 or Wave Race, and then going home and downloading it. Like, that was, first time thing, and it was so neat. It was unthinkable back then. But there were a lot of negatives about the service, and a lot of them came down to third-party support. Now, back then, third parties kind of dipped their toes into it, mostly at the start. But over time, we saw support start to collapse. And the reason for that was a lot of big Nintendo fans were buying the huge name games, stuff like Super Metroid, or Donkey Kong Country 2, because they had either played those, years prior and wanted to revisit them, or because they heard people raving about those games. But what ended up happening is that people ignored a lot of the smaller games as a result. Perfect example would be Konami's original Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles game. Now, when they announced this for the Virtual Console, I was so excited, but I didn't buy it. I didn't buy it because what it meant to me was Konami was finally going to bring over Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2, the arcade game, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 3, the Manhattan Project, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 4, Turtles in Time. I was so amped for those releases, but they never happened because Konami saw terrible sales. They saw the extra that they had to invest in bringing this game over, particularly when it came to getting the licensing rights to do, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles again, because they had to give back to the owners, which at the time was not Nickelodeon, Paramount, etc., which it is now. But still, it cost a little bit extra, and people didn't buy it. It was a huge problem, and I understand why people like the virtual console. I love the idea of being able to digitally own these games, but people weren't willing to fork over five, six, $10 for games they'd never heard about before. But one thing that's really cool that we've seen in the Nintendo Switch era is that because everybody gets these games now as part of their subscription, you can see on social media how people are finally giving these games a chance because they're getting them free. I hate to use the term free because it is a subscription based thing, but you realistically aren't having to pay for each individual game. So there's much greater incentive. There is for me personally. Like, I would never plunk down $10 to try Tonic Trouble on N64. But when it's on Virtual Console, absolutely I'm going to do that because if I spend 20 minutes with it and I get bored, oh well. It's part of my subscription. I'm paying for that anyway. Like, that's money spent, especially how Nintendo does it, because it's not like a monthly thing usually. Usually they charge you up front for the whole thing. So it's like no big deal. But when it came to Virtual Console, if I was spending $10 on these games, even if it was just one time buying Tonic Trouble, the next time, some obscure N64 game came on there, I'd, think to myself, well, I never played Tonic Trouble, or, I never played, Cruising USA, which is not, unfortunately, on Nintendo Switch Online yet, though I really do wish it was. Um, so people were rethinking their purchases. People got stingy eventually, and the well of games that Nintendo could add to this service dried up over time. So, personally, I think that Nintendo Switch Online is a lot better. I think it's a much better investment for your dollars. I think that you get to explore and discover games that you wouldn't otherwise. And not only for, people like me, but for younger kids. Like, a parent isn't going to give a kid license to buy a ton of retro games, but again, when it's part of a subscription that's already paid for, the next generation of gamers get to discover these titles that might have flown under the radar. Just because it's not you know uh, the Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time doesn't mean it's not worth playing. And I think Nintendo Switch Online is really striking that balance in a great way. Surprisingly, Nintendo has done like a really good job over, I think it came out like a year or two into Nintendo Switch's existence. So, in that many years, so let's say, like 6 years or whatever, we've seen a steady stream of releases. Now, there's a lot missing. Like, I'm not going to lie. One of the things that I miss the most is the Pokemon Game Boy games. We got those on 3DS Virtual Console, and we've had nothing since. Pokemon's big anniversary is coming up in 2026, the 30-year anniversary. I'm really crossing my fingers that either we get some Virtual Console release, or I'm sorry, Nintendo Switch Online release, or a physical version, that I can pop into my Switch and, have, red, blue, yellow, and gold, silver, crystal, whatnot. And that brings me to another thing that's better about the current era versus the Wii Virtual Console era, and it's that we are now getting a lot more collected compilation games than we were back then. The Virtual Console kind of showed publishers like Konami and Capcom and Square Enix that there is a lot of interest in their older material. So while you might not be able to digitally purchase, a lot of games the way you used to on the Virtual Console, you can physically or digitally buy compilation games that collect all of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles games from Konami, or all of the original Mega Man series, or the Mega Man X series, and stuff like that. And personally, that's another thing that I like a lot more about the current era. But there's various problems. Like, I do think people should be able to buy, Super Metroid and A Link to the Past and like the most classic Nintendo games. I feel like Nintendo should offer a way to full on acquire those without having to play them through a subscription. I know that there's some people that would prefer that. Um, I can see why they can't necessarily do that for every third party game that shows up on these. Like I could see, Capcom maybe, being reluctant to offer that for like the Mega Man Game Boy games, which are available. But there's no reason that Nintendo couldn't do that for A Link to the Past and Super Metroid and Super Mario World, etc., etc. So there's room to improve. But the service is really cool. And I think that a lot of people underrate how good Nintendo Switch Online is, especially for what you spend for it. Because like I have a PS5 and an Xbox Series X, and let me tell you, it is way more expensive to have those online services. I was a huge Game Pass user up until just a few months ago. Uh, it's I'm priced out of it. Like $30 a month is absurd for Xbox or for Xbox Game Pass Ultimate. So $50 a year for Nintendo Switch Online versus $30 a month for Game Pass. I know that I'm not getting, brand new day one releases, but I don't know. I'll take that trade off. Maybe you're different, but I'm excited to see what else is coming in 2026. We've got the Virtual Boy, which is really cool. Like we're gonna get pretty much the whole Virtual Boy, library. I don't know if we'll get every single thing, but I'm excited. Like I was Virtual Boy is the one Nintendo system that I never owned. So the ability to like check out the library, I played it like one time at my cousin's house. So like being able to actually play those games and really see what the system had to offer, that's really cool to me. And I'll tell you right now, I wouldn't have been spending $4 or $5 a Virtual Boy game. I might have bought one or two, but now I'll be able to get to see everything that Nintendo adds without, breaking the bank. So I think it's personally speaking, I think Nintendo Switch Online beats the pants off of the Virtual Console. As cool as that service was when it came out, as much as I loved it at the time, as much as I loved seeing, each week of new releases and hearing about each TurboGrafx 16 game that was added in addition to SNES and Genesis and stuff, I don't miss those days. I don't miss, having to pay, individually for each title. And I thought about all this as I was playing Rayman 2 on the N64 app last week. I don't know that I'll stick with it, but being able to go play, a critically acclaimed 3D platformer, and not have to drop any extra cash, it's hard to beat that. So I'd like to hear what you think about the whole debate, Virtual Console versus Nintendo Switch Online. Did you prefer the way Nintendo used to do it? Would you like to see the Virtual Console return? Are you disappointed that in the Switch 2 era we didn't get it back? Let me know in the comments. Hit me up on social media. I'm on Blue Sky, quite a bit. That's like my premier social media account. I'm at Mark DeChamp, MARCDA Champ on Blue Sky, and think about subscribing and sticking around. Let me know what you think. I love doing these videos. We're here. We're talking about video games. There's gonna be some big video game stuff to talk about in 2026. And this channel is dedicated to quite a bit of gaming stuff on top of movies and comics and all kinds of pop culture. So if you like what I had to say, think about subscribing, think about sharing, and thank you so much for watching.